we saw with respect to Fabric Warehouse, the different aspects on time travel, warehouse snapshot, and restore points, the difference among the three. And unlike Fabric Lakehouse, wherein one can optimize the data files leveraging optimize command, vorder, zorder, or can vacuum the data, in Fabric Warehouse, everything is automatic. Warehouse automatically preserves and maintains the various versions of the data up to a default retention period of 30 days. So this allows the ability to query the warehouse retention aspects to the point in time with respect to time travel up to 30 days itself. The retention automatically begins from the moment the warehouse gets created, and expired files are automatically deleted after the retention threshold, meaning Microsoft does not provide us with the flexibility on the optimization or the vacuum aspects. Everything is automatically taken care by Microsoft itself. This is with respect to the Fabric Warehouse. Now, from Fabric Warehouse, which acts as the data warehouse equivalent of the Fabric ecosystem, we then moved into the OLTP version of the OLTP database, or the transactional database equivalent in the Fabric ecosystem, which is the Fabric SQL database. Now in Fabric SQL database, whenever we create a Fabric SQL database, along with that an equivalent semantic model, the default semantic model and the SQLantics endpoints gets created, similar to the Lakehouse creation as well. And similar to the Fabric Lakehouse, wherein the SQL Analytics endpoint is the read-only version, similar is the case with the Fabric SQL database SQL Analytics endpoint. Now, we observed that all the storage aspect, that is SQL Analytics endpoint and Fabric warehouses created within the same workspace, get hosted within the same server that is unique at a workspace level. And since all the databases or the SQL Analytics endpoints and the Fabric warehouses are within the same server, one can cross query the data between those two as long as those are within the same server, or to be more specific, those are within the same workspace. Now, one cannot cross query between Fabric warehouses that are present across different workspaces, because every workspace would have its own unique server, and that Fabric warehouse would be hosted on the new server in itself. So one cannot cross query between Fabric warehouses that are present across two different workspaces. So in that case, how can one cross query the data? So let's assume that I have two Fabric warehouses. Fabric warehouse in Fabric warehouse in workspace 1, Fabric warehouse in workspace 2. Imagine that if I want to cross query the data between the two Fabric warehouses, which are present across two different workspaces, what should be my solution without duplicating the data? One way is I can physically duplicate the data from one Fabric warehouse into another Fabric warehouse, thereby duplicating the data in the one lake. Is it possible for me to query the data that is present in the Fabric warehouse in workspace 1 within Fabric warehouse in workspace 2? Any thoughts?
Shortcut.
Where would you create the shortcut? Within the Fabric warehouse?
Yes, within the Fabric warehouse. Yeah.
Did we see creation of shortcut within the Fabric warehouse? Does Fabric warehouse allow us to create shortcuts?
No, we created shortcuts in Lakehouse.
Correct. And at any point of the time, similar to dynamic data masking, where I stated that dynamic data masking is supported across SQL Analytics endpoint, Fabric Warehouse, Fabric SQL database. Did I say that shortcut is supported in Fabric Warehouse? No, correct. We saw shortcut only in the concept of Lakehouse. Agree? So the answer is correct that we can leverage shortcut and query the data. But then your Lakehouse, so in that case, what we need to do is create a Lakehouse in workspace 2. Then create a shortcut within that Lakehouse from workspace 1 in the Lakehouse in workspace 2. And then since the Lakehouse 2 and Fabric Warehouse 2 are in the same workspace, you can cross query and read the shortcut within the Fabric Warehouse 2. In that way, you are creating an intermittent bridge from your Fabric Warehouse 1 to Fabric Warehouse 2. Is it clear or still any confusion?
No, just repeat once, Nandan. I understood there is a bridge of Lakehouse, but how will it will work? Just can you repeat it once?
So you all stated that shortcut is the way for us to read the data between two Fabric warehouses that are present in different workspaces. That is correct. But how? So shortcuts can be created only in the Lakehouse. We all agree. Correct. And in
Yes.
workspace 2, that I need to read the data of the workspace 1. So in workspace 2, I'll create a Lakehouse. Then in
Okay.
workspace, I'll create a shortcut to the Fabric warehouse in the workspace 1. And since Fabric warehouse 2 and that Lakehouse is present in the same workspace, I can cross query the data. I can read the data from the Lakehouse into the Fabric warehouse, meaning I can read that shortcut that I created. And that shortcut is mapping to Fabric warehouse 1. So indirectly, I'm reading Fabric warehouse 1 data into my Fabric warehouse 2. But I am using the Lakehouse as a bridge. Now, is it clear?
Yes.
Or still any confusion? Team, this
Clear.
weekend there would be a heavy load of case study, and that is up till now we had been just I had been providing case study on basis of the current session itself. But this weekend the case study would be all union of all the discussions that we had and end-to-end architecture designing. So do understand the concepts, and in case if there are any queries, do reach out at that time itself. So now in shortcut, let me try creating a new shortcut. We saw that the external sources are supported. Remember, we are yet to identify the main crux of authentication and authorization on the shortcut aspect and the security aspect pertaining to the Lakehouse, Fabric Warehouse, and the Fabric SQL database, which would cover in the subsequent sessions, because that is data governance and security, which is an advanced aspect. Now, in case if I have to create the shortcut, let me order by the corresponding location. Location meaning the workspaces. So if you all can see that I can create a shortcut to a Fabric warehouse, to a Fabric SQL database, to a Lakehouse, to a KQL database. Connect the different storage aspect. I can also see that there is a warehouse snapshot, mirror database. Connect. If you all remember what is warehouse snapshot, it is with respect to the aspect that we had created, the snapshot aspect of the warehouse that we had created. Let me try referencing the warehouse snapshot in my shortcut. Okay, this is stating me that snapshot can you see? In case of warehouse snapshot, let me go back to that snapshot aspect. So snapshot was present in which workspace? Let me check. Warehouse snapshot was present. Let's take a look with respect to the snapshot data. So if you see, the current snapshot is empty because the data itself is empty. So now let me go to the optimization workspace. So I have WH underscore snapshot, correct? That contains the snapshot of my warehouse. Now let me try creating a shortcut to that warehouse snapshot, which is WH underscore snapshot. So can you see? Though I am able to see the data here, the snapshot tables are not getting loaded. It is because warehouse snapshots are not supported for shortcut within the Fabric Lakehouse. Though it shows under display, one cannot create a shortcut to the warehouse snapshot. Consider the warehouse snapshot as the SQL Analytics endpoint equivalent, correct? Which is a read only. Are SQL Analytics endpoint anywhere supported here? No, correct. It's the front end layer that is being supported, either the Lakehouse tables files, SQL database, Fabric Warehouse, KQL database, or the Mirror database. Mirror database will take a look eventually. So even though warehouse snapshot is visible to us in the snapshot aspect, one cannot create a shortcut to the tables that are present within the warehouse snapshot. Any queries up till now? But can one create a shortcut to the Fabric SQL database? The answer to that is yes, I can create a shortcut to the Fabric SQL database. So one way is, imagine that in the SQL Analytics endpoint, the collation is defined to only 2 collations, whereas in the Fabric SQL database, it supports multiple collations. If rather than leveraging the SQL Analytics endpoint for cross query, what I can do is I can create a shortcut to my Fabric SQL database and I can leverage that for cross query. Now, let me go to this lakehouse. In this lakehouse, I have created a shortcut called Titanic shortcut or structured one shortcut. Can I create a shortcut in this lakehouse mapping to the shortcut in this lakehouse? Is it possible? Meaning, can one shortcut reference another shortcut? Is there any confusion in the question?
I think yes.
No, question is
No,
clear.
question is clear. Yeah. Shortcut to shortcut you are talking about.
Yes. Someone stated yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the answer to that is yes. I can reference one shortcut to another shortcut. Then the question becomes, why not directly map it to the source itself? There are other reasons for that. What I mean by that is, let's take an example here. So now let me go to a workspace called Dataverse. If you all remember, I had stated that Dataverse is equivalent to the database equivalent of the Power Platform ecosystem of Microsoft. Correct? So in that case, now, okay. So now this is a lake house. In this lake house, what I have done is there is something called as Fabric Link, which you all can ignore because this is some advanced level. I am creating a shortcut from the Dataverse into the Fabric ecosystem. And you all can see that from the, from here, correct? The symbol that is present here. Now in that Fabric Link that I suggested can be established only once in the Fabric ecosystem, in the tenant, in one link. Meaning, in case if I have to synchronize the data from the Dataverse into the Fabric ecosystem, there is something called as a Fabric Link. But only one Fabric Link can be established from between a tenant. So I have already established this Fabric Link. And what the Fabric Link does is it creates a shortcut to the Dataverse from the Fabric, and that you all can see. Now imagine that if I want to read this data in some another workspace, rather than again creating a Fabric Link, which is not supported, you can create a shortcut mapping to this shortcut in another lakehouse. What I mean by that is, now if I try creating a new shortcut, let me sort it by location, Dataverse, YLDF's default Dataverse. Let me select this Dataverse. If you can see in the table section that I am mapping to, I am mapping it to a shortcut itself. So a shortcut can reference another shortcut. But does that mean I can refer n number of shortcuts? No, there is a limitation to that. Meaning the chain of shortcuts that we would be creating, correct? Meaning shortcut mapping to a shortcut, there is a limitation. So today's case study for you all would be, try creating that chain multiple times and identify what is the limitation of that chain to chain mapping. That should hardly take maximum 15 minutes for you all to complete that case study for today. We want to identify what is the maximum chain to chain shortcut one can create within the Fabric ecosystem. There is a hard limit to that. Any queries on the aspect of shortcuts now? And
Nandan, you are meaning a chain of the shortcut, like shortcut to shortcut, then shortcut to shortcut, like that. Okay.
yes. So there is a limitation as to how much shortcut to shortcut references can be done. That is what I expect you all to identify. So now, then we shifted to the Fabric. We also took a look with respect to how to create a Fabric warehouse with a case insensitive collation. It's via the REST API. And then we saw that one cannot cross query, or one cannot join or do cross queries with different collations. There is a collation conflict that comes in. So to resolve that, we use expression level collations, and it is there that, if you will remember that I had stated that even if SQL Analytics endpoint supports two collations, but by default we can only have a single collation, then what is the use of another collation? It is for cross querying aspect, in case if we want to make it if we want to leverage collations across different collation resolution aspects. Then we moved over to the Fabric SQL database and we created a Fabric SQL database. Now there is a limitation of how many Fabric SQL database one can create within a tenant. It is because it's still in preview mode. And for that, at the backend, it basically leverages an Azure SQL server. So there are some limitations pertaining to that. Now, in order for you all to enable that, meaning to create a Fabric SQL database, you have to enable this property called SQL database. So now, the next aspect that we can see with respect to the Fabric SQL database is, does Fabric SQL database support Git integration? So as of now, this is stating that it's uncommitted. Uncommitted meaning it does support Git integration. So let me go and commit the changes into the Git integration. So any queries up till now? Okay. Now let's take a look with respect to the SQL database aspects. So in SQL database aspect, we covered yesterday on the concepts of templates and some of the setting aspects, except the restore point and performance summary. Now the performance summary tab provides us with respect to the performance insights that we had seen corresponding to the SQL Analytics endpoint and the Fabric warehouse, wherein it provides us with respect to how much CPU has been consumed, what is the overall size that has been allocated for this database, meaning what is the overall size that has been consumed by this database. Has any automatic indexes been created for automation for performance improvement purposes? If you'll remember what is index, index is physical or logical rearrangement of data for better performance for querying the data, but it does have an impact, reverse impact while inserting the data. How many users are active connections are to the Fabric SQL database. So this provides us with respect to the performance summary. But similar to the front-end view, there are back-end, meaning T-SQL queries also, which helps us what we call as data management views, DMV, that helps us identify the same data that is visible here, but at a granular aspect within the back-end as via T-SQL queries. Now this new API for GraphQL, this is somewhat of a very advanced concept. So in layman terminology, if I have to explain you, GraphQL, QL stands for query language. GraphQL is somewhat similar to REST API itself. What is REST API? It acts as an interface between your end layer and an application layer, or between application to application, it acts as a bridge. Consider GraphQL as a similar and an advanced version of REST API. So in case if you want for your Fabric SQL database to have interactions with some applications, you can create it via the GraphQL method. So this is a very advanced concept which I would skip. Now, what is this replication and security? Security aspect I'll cover by this weekend of all the databases, how to provide access to the databases or to the storage layer explicitly. Up till now, we have seen workspace level access only. But in order for a user to access that workspace, the user needs to have a Power BI Pro, minimum Power BI Pro license. But imagine that I want to grant a user who does not have any license access on the databases. Is it possible? Because for workspace level access, though I can add it, but the user needs to, in order for a user to access it from Azure portal, Fabric portal via Workspace, he needs to have a license. But imagine that I need to grant a user only access within the Fabric SQL database or within the SQL Analytics endpoint or within the Fabric warehouse without giving him any access on the workspace. With the viewer access, he can check all the components that are present, and I do not want to give the user that opportunity. So is it possible for me to grant a user access only on the Fabric SQL database or the corresponding storage aspect? The answer to that is yes. And that's how this managed security aspect comes in, which we'll discuss in detail subsequently. Now, corresponding to the replication, there is something called as restore points. Now, what Microsoft does is, if you all remember, someone had asked me, does the Fabric Warehouse restore point create a full backup, differential backup, etc.? Now, in case of the restore point that is getting created in the Fabric SQL database, there are concepts of how the backup is getting created. First of all these backups are automatic. We cannot govern it. And maximum backups are created for the backups are retained for a default 7 days itself. Now, how does the Fabric SQL database take backups? The automatic backups. Every week, for that corresponding Fabric SQL database, a full backup is created. What do I mean by full backup? Let's take a scenario that I created the Fabric SQL database yesterday. Correct? So a full backup is the automatic creation of the full backup is scheduled immediately. Now, depending upon the size of your Fabric SQL database, the backup creation would take some time. It can get created within 5 minutes till 30 minutes to 1 hour, depending upon the size of your Fabric SQL database. But the moment your Fabric SQL database is created or restored for the first time, instantly it creates a full backup. What do I mean by full backup? The entire database backup is created. But then imagine that post that creation of the Fabric SQL database, a backup got created. Now, after the backup got created, the full backup that got created, I make certain changes within the data. I create certain additional tables. I add or update certain tables and add certain attributes. Correct? So in that case, then rather than taking full backups every time, because unlike Fabric Warehouse wherein the restore points were getting created based on only the metadata was getting copied, but the underlying data was still the Parquet file, so there was no data duplication. But in case of the Fabric SQL database, the backups are created within some Azure storage for which we do not have access to. So all the backups that are in the SQL database in Fabric are stored in some zone redundant Azure storage account. And we do not have direct access to that. And since there are backups that are getting copied into a storage account, which is external to this one lake, there are additional costs involved. Hence, having full backup, imagine you have 1 TB of database size. Creating 1 TB backup every time is a very costly affair. Hence, what would happen is once the database is created or every week, a full backup is created. Hence, I stated the default retention of the backup is 7 days because every 7 days, the full backup gets overridden with the latest backup. So meaning the earliest restore point here is basically yesterday's time, 9:12 a.m. It is at that time that I had created the Fabric SQL database. Since I had created the Fabric SQL database at that, somewhat similar to that time, immediately a full backup got created. Now this full backup would get deleted and would get a new full backup would get created next week. Hence, the default retention period is 7 days. But then, if that is happening, then why do I see this latest restore point? What does this latest restore point here signify? 6/11/25. That is today's date. Is this a full backup? No. So basically, any changes that I made after the full backup, for that differential backups are getting created every 12 hours. What do I mean by differential backup? From the point in time that I created, meaning any changes that transpired post the full backup to the time that the backup is getting created, is the differential backup. So in case if I have to explain, so let's consider that I create a full backup at 8th of June at 12 p.m. So now the next full backup would get created on weekly affair, that is 15th of June at 12 p.m. So at that time, this backup would get deleted and this backup would be present. That would contain the as of that state of that database, the entire database. Hence, the retention of that is 7 days. But then imagine after 12 o'clock, I created multiple new tables. Let's say I created table 1. I updated table 2. I truncated table 3. So what would happen is every 12 hours, a differential backup is taken. So after 12 p.m., the next backup that would be taken is 12 a.m. A 12-hour difference, correct? So at 12 a.m., a differential backup is taken, not full backup. Differential backup. This was full backup. Full meaning it contains the entire 1 TB of data. But now, in the next backup that is taken, this backup is still there. Then another backup is taken. That is differential backup. Now, what does that differential backup contain? That differential backup contains all the changes that has transpired after 12 p.m. till 12 a.m. So it contains these set of changes in this backup. Now imagine that this is at 12 a.m. Then at 12 p.m. on 9th. So after 12 a.m. at 12 a.m. a differential backup got created that would contain the new T1 table, the T2 table and the truncation state, these set of changes. After 12 a.m. I create a view 1. I create another table called T6 and I drop a table T1. So after, since differential backups are every 12-hour gap, now what would happen is at 12 p.m. on 9th, another differential backup would be created. And what would that differential backup be? It would be the entire data from the full backup till now, meaning it would contain these set of changes and these set of changes. So the differential backup is a union of all the changes from the full backup till the time the differential backup is getting created. So the first differential backup only had these changes, but the next differential backup would have changes from 12 p.m. till the next 12 p.m. So it is this plus this changes. So this is differential backup. Then comes transaction log backups. Now transaction log backups are created every 10 minutes. Now what do I mean by transaction log backups? See, the full backup got created on 12 p.m. Now the differential backup would be getting created at 12 a.m. So there is a 12-hour gap. Imagine that if I make multiple changes, if I made these set of changes, correct? If I made these set of changes and my data got corrupted or my database got corrupted before the differential backup got created. In that way, unfortunately, I have to restore it to the previous full backup and I have to recreate this set of changes. So it's an additional effort on that aspect. So rather than just relying on differential backup, what Microsoft does is it creates something called as transaction log backups every 10 minutes. What I mean by that is, imagine that if I have created T1 table at 1 p.m. T2 table at 1:30, correct? So every 10 minutes, the transactional log backups are created, meaning any changes that happen. So at 12:10, it would try to create a transaction log backup, but there were no changes, correct? At 12:30, I created this table. So at 12:30, a transaction log backup is created. Transaction log backup 1. That would contain this change. At 1 o'clock, T2 table is created. Since every 10 minutes, it tries to create the transaction log backup. Since there are no transactions between that, I can consider that there are no log files are getting done. Then at 1 o'clock, another transaction log file is created that would contain this change, T2 change. Similarly, between the full backup and differential backup, or between differential backup to differential backups, there are multiple transaction log backups that are getting created. So now let's imagine that I created the full backup on 8th, 12 p.m. My database got corrupted on let's say 10th of June at 3 p.m. So in that case, how can I restore my database to the proper extent? So at that time, the process would be, first, I need to restore the full backup. Full backup, what full backup would do is, it would restore the database to the point as of 8th of June, 12 p.m. Post restoring the full backup, then I'll restore the difference. So first step is restore the full backup. Post full backup, then restore the differential backup as of 10th at 12 p.m. 10th, 12 p.m. This is full backup as of 8th of June, 12 p.m. Full backups are created weekly. So the latest full backup that I have is as of 8th. Post that, differential backups are created that would contain delta data from the full backup to the point in time changes. So now I have a differential backup. Since it's every 12 hours the differential backup are created, I have the latest differential backup is as of 10th 12 p.m. So this would contain all the changes from 8th of June 12 p.m. till 10th of June 12 p.m. Post that, I'll restore all the differential or transaction log backups that have been created from 12 p.m. onwards on 10th of June. So the differential or the transaction log backups that have been created after 10th 12 p.m. differential backup till 3 p.m. I'll restore that. That would give me the latest state of data before I corrupted it. Understood how the backup concept works in Fabric SQL database, unlike Fabric Warehouse, which is much more easier. This is a little complicated.
And then transaction logs only consider in that period whatever is there, right? Like in that differential,
Yes.
it was considering from 12 p.m. to 12 p.m. the previous one also. But this is only during from one transaction to another transaction, only that difference is there, right?
Correct. But that's what was in Azure SQL database. I can I confirm that's my understanding. And since Fabric SQL database is hosted on Azure SQL database, that is the aspect. But still, I'll confirm back tomorrow on this. But 99%, it's what I stated, that transactional log contains that time period rather than union of all the time period, since it's created every 10 minutes.
So
Any
Nandan, if the transactions are happening, then only that is creating every 10 minutes or
yes,
irrespective
that's
of
what
that it
I'll
is
get back
created?
to that, Ashish, correct?
Okay.
But yes, in case if transactions are created, then it would preserve, is my understanding. But still, I'll confirm back on the what exactly is happening before tomorrow's call.
Okay. And consider that if the differential backups are happening, right, and it is union of the previous ones. So is it deleting the previous ones?
The default retention is 7 days, is what Microsoft has stated. And since this is a proprietary storage format, we do not have that much visibility as to how the differential backups and the transaction log backups are getting deleted or overridden. There is no proper documentation, so I cannot comment on that. It's the
Okay.
product team who can confirm on that aspect.
Mhm.
But
Okay.
one aspect is what Microsoft has stated is the retentions are the retention aspects are retained for a span of 7 days. Post 7 days, it gets deleted. That is sure. So at one point of the time, it would get deleted. But since full backups are weekly, so automatically the full backup is getting overridden. That is, there cannot exist more than one full backup. That I can guarantee. With respect to differential backup, unfortunately, I do not know.
Mhm. Okay.
But I
And
can
in
reach
case
out
of
to
full backups, in case of full backups, you mentioned first is on 8th, the next one is will be on 15th, right? on 17th, I want to restore the version whatever was on 19th, right? So I do not have the full backup of it because it was replaced with the full backup which we took on 15th, right? So, and we just have the differential backups from 9th, correct? So how it would restore, because we do not have full, we just have the differential backup.
You cannot post 7 days, you cannot go back to that. And there's no concept of time travel in the Fabric SQL database, since the underlying data is not in the form of delta per k. Correct? So you cannot go back beyond time, beyond that 7 days. It's in case if you identify that you want to go back, it's in that 7 days only that you can go back. Post that, there is no way for you to have that restore point. Clear?
Yes, but I am trying to restore within 7 days only.
Okay, sorry.
So I was
can
on
you
16th, I was on 16th and I'm trying to restore for 9th.
give me 1 minute. So you mean to say when did the full backup get created?
It was on 8th. The next one was on 15th.
8th. So the next backup is on 15th. Correct?
15th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
And today is 16th and I want to restore for 9th.
Not 9th, na 6th. Then you have to restore 15, correct? Right, then that is the latest backup.
Correct. 15th is the latest backup. So when I say 7, it is meaning the retention, the full aspect of retention. But yes, you can retain it because of the differential backups. And okay, let me show you in the portal. That would be much more easier to understand. So now, let me go to the trial capacity in the SQL demo. There is an option to restore the database. Now, when you restore the database, it does not override the existing database. It creates a new database. Correct? So now let me create a new database called restored DB. So at that time, it provides me the restore points. So the earliest restore point at that time that would be visible would be 7 days. Full restore point, correct? That would be 7 days. So at that time, it is n minus 7. So you can identify at what time you want. And then these are the, if you see 8, 15, 30, 45, it is providing you every 15 minutes what you can restore it. But what Microsoft suggested is the log backups are getting created every 10 minutes. But here it is showing every 15 minutes that I can restore. Correct? So these are some of the open questions that we have asked Microsoft product team, for which we are yet to get a reply on that. As to, I hope you all understood my question, correct? While restoring the restore points, it is showing me every 15 minutes. But the log files are getting created every 10 minutes. So then how can we identify the difference? Then shouldn't it be every 10 minutes? For that, unfortunately, we also do not have the answer, and there's no proper documentation since the Fabric SQL database is still in preview mode. So the documentations are not up to date. And in that aspect, what Microsoft suggests is you can only go back to the earliest restore point, and the earliest restore point is your full differential backup itself. So coming to your question, Ashish, that we have yet not completed, meaning it should be current day minus 7, correct? Because the backups are getting retained for 7 days. But your latest backup got updated to 15th. Then it is the differential backups that are getting preserved. So does that mean I cannot go back in 7 days? Let me get back to you on that post my discussion with some of the product team members.
Sure.
Since, as I said, we do not know what the proprietary storage format is. And as per Microsoft documentation, it is default 7 retention period. Correct? And the full differential backups are getting created weekly. So in that aspect, can I go back in the restore point on how they are preserving that I need to reach out to the product team itself. But there is no concept of time travel in Fabric SQL database. Only via restore points that you can restore the, when I say time travel meaning querying the old versions of the data in the existing database itself, similar to how we had done for the Lakehouse and the Fabric warehouse. Because those were preserving the data in the form of Delta Parquet itself. But in Fabric SQL database, all the backups are getting created externally in an Azure SQL database server for which we do not have access to. We just have access to the front end layer, the direct SQL database aspect itself. So, any queries up till now other than this aspect? So, two actions on me is identify or confirm the statement that I said, that log backups contain only the delta aspect and not the full aspect, similar to the differential backup. And second is on the retention aspect, on going back in time, once going back to 7 days once the full backup is created. Or Microsoft might be preserving these two backups as well, meaning at one point in the time there might be two full backups, but there is no clear Microsoft documentation. I'll confirm that and get back to you all. It might take some days for me to reach out to the product team. So any queries on the Fabric SQL database? And we saw that Fabric SQL database supports multiple collations, all of which that are supported in Microsoft ecosystem, because at the top it is being hosted on an Azure SQL database itself. So this is with respect to the Fabric SQL database, another storage layer, another storage concept within the Microsoft Fabric ecosystem. Now we synchronized the SQL database, got synced to the repository. So now let me refresh my Azure DevOps. I can see that object name dot object type. Here I can see that a SQL project file got created and I can see all the database states, correct? Like sales LT is my schema. Within that I have these tables, and here I can see the table definition, and this states that I have a table. It has these many constraints, indexes, etc. So all the metadata of the database got synchronized within my Git repository. So any queries up till now on the Fabric SQL database? I am not covering views, stored procedures, etc. that can be created within the SQL databases. Those are common SQL aspects. I'm telling the infrastructure as a service, meaning the object as a service to you all, and its different features and functionalities. Whatever one can create within an Azure SQL database can be created in the Fabric SQL database as well, like dynamic data masking, JSON parsing, regex, etc. So any queries before we close the concept of storage layer? The KQL database I'll cover at the end when we discuss the real-time streaming. So any queries up till now? Okay. So now, up till now, we covered the three main storage layers. That is the Fabric SQL database, the Fabric warehouse, and the Lakehouse. Now, in the recent Fabric conference, Microsoft announced, see, these are SQL databases, or meaning the, as of now, the Lakehouse is your data lake equivalent that contains structured, semi-structured, or unstructured data. Whereas Fabric SQL database and Fabric Warehouse are your structured databases. But there is something called as NoSQL databases as well that we had seen, correct? That is for structured and semi-structured data to query it in the form of SQL and some API route. So for that in Azure, there is something called as Cosmos database. Recently, Microsoft announced an equivalent of Cosmos database in the Fabric ecosystem. Now, I don't remember whether that was in private preview or public preview. Okay, it seems it is in private preview. So eventually a new storage layer is storage system is gonna come called Cosmos database. That is the NoSQL database equivalent in the Fabric ecosystem. This is not that, this is mirroring, which is something different. So to store data, we have something called as Lakehouse, Fabric Warehouse, SQL database, semantic model. Event House is the KQL database that we are talking about. And you all can see this something called as Data Mart. Now remember, the Data Mart is in preview mode and would get deprecated in subsequent months. And Microsoft is suggesting everyone to move from Data Mart to the corresponding Fabric Warehouse or to the SQL database or the semantic model. So we can ignore this. Data Mart object was created around 1.5 to 2 years back, and it is still in preview mode. And at that time, even Fabric was not generally available. So we can get rid of this Data Mart and not discuss about it because Microsoft is deprecating this functionality. So up till now, we covered the storage layer of Microsoft Fabric ecosystem. But then the next step is data movement and data transformation. So for that, you have something called as a data factory experience within Microsoft Fabric. If you see, we discussed the storage layer up till now. Now we would be discussing the data factory experience. Now the data factory experience consists of two components within Microsoft Fabric. Two features within Microsoft Fabric. One is called data pipeline and another is called data flow Gen 2. Not Gen 1, data flow Gen 2. So within data factory experience, that is for data movement and data transformation, I have two features or functionalities. One is data pipeline and another is data flow Gen 2. So we would be covering or we will discuss data pipeline now. So let me go ahead and create a data pipeline. So I can provide a pipeline name. Now, I cannot create multiple pipelines with the same name within the same workspace. I can create pipeline 1 in workspace 1 and I can create pipeline 1 in workspace 2 because pipelines are bound to the workspace itself. So I can create similar pipeline names across different workspaces, but within the same workspace, I cannot have a pipeline with the similar name. So and we all can see that it's case insensitive, the names. So I have pipeline 1, which is small lowercase, and if I have pipeline 1, which is uppercase, it would consider it as the same. So now I am creating pipeline underscore 1, which is a unique name. Now, what is a pipeline? Can anyone, in normal terminology of data engineering world, those who are familiar with data engineering world, can anyone state me what does the pipeline signify?
It's a logical group of
It
activities.
used for data transfer in data flow.
Sorry,
From
it's logical group of.
activities.
Okay, you introduce another terminology which would be confusing. What do you mean by activities?
So activities like data movement. Okay, activities can be data movement, data transformation. So yeah, that is.
So can I state that in layman terminology, pipeline is basically a particular flow of certain tasks that I want to do on the data in
Yes.
simple aspect.
Yes.
It's a controlled flow of certain tasks or rules or some processes that I want to do on my data in a controlled phase.
Yes.
So this is a generic definition of what pipeline is across any ETL tool.
Yeah.
I introduced a terminology called ETL ELT. So now let me explain that concept before we move across with the data aspect, data pipeline aspect. Now, as I stated, the data factory experience is for data movement and data transformations. Now, why do I have the need of moving the data or doing the data transformations? It's for my analytical. The end goal is analytical. Imagine that as an organization, I have data across different sources. Let's consider that my organization, correct? In my organization, I have my own personal website, correct? So in that, I want to identify the traffic on my website, who all have hit the website how many times, etc. So I need to get the data from my website. That's one source of my data. Then certain users might have sent me the details in a survey that I'm conducting. So it can be the Google Sheets or Microsoft survey forms that I'm sending as my another data source. Then there would be HR folks within my organization who would be having some Excel sheets on which they are manually managing the data, the time in, time out, or some of the salary informations for other employees within my organization that they want to send, the page checks that they are signing across, or my bank details. So there are different sources of data. And I want the cumulative of this data to be analyzed in my report level. Meaning how many users who have visited the website have actually filled the survey, and what is the survey about, and of those all who have filled the survey, how many of them have actually joined my boot camp. So there are different set of data across different sources, but the end goal is how, rather than doing a silo data analysis, cumulate that data into a one single source of aspect and do the analysis on top of that. So there are requirements wherein I need to extract the data from different sources and bring somewhere so that I can do a when I say union, I can do a cumulative data analysis rather than silo data analysis. So first step at any data engineering is extracting the data from different set of sources. That's what E stands for, extract. Now, depending upon your organizational cost and the tool capabilities, what I can do is I can extract the data. Now, when you extract the data might not be in correct format itself, correct? Meaning, see, imagine that you are extracting survey data in certain aspects, or let's imagine Excel data that my HRs are manually maintaining. And you'll know HR do manual Excel work. They're manual, meaning there is bound to be some data issues or corrupt aspect. So I need to do some data validations before I load that data into my system, so that I do not load any erroneous or corrupt data. So at that time, what I can do is I extract the data, then I do some data transformations, like I clean that data. Or imagine that, let's say that I have the HR only added full name column, meaning they added my entire name, Nandan Hegde. But in my analysis, I want first name and second name as separate columns, attributes, so that I can aggregate by everyone's surname and identify their regional language aspect, which would help me understand how well my organization is doing with respect to reaching the language barrier or community. Let's consider that aspect. So in that aspect, rather than full name, I want to manage two separate attributes, first name and second name. So in that aspect, I have to do some transformation, meaning I have to separate the full name column into two separate aspects. And imagine that, let's say there are certain columns like Mr. and Mrs. or some title that the HR forgot to add. And it's a mandatory column. Depending on the name, I can identify and fill it based on certain logical aspect. Let's consider that. So doing those set of transformations, data validations, etc., is the T part of the ETL. That is, I'm extracting the data from the sources. I'm transforming the data within the sources not within the sources, transforming the data that I extracted from the sources. And then finally, once the transformed data is clear, I load that into my destination or into my Fabric ecosystem in this case. So this is the ETL process: extract, transform, and load. Now this was a traditional process wherein, when I say traditional process, because earlier, in earlier days, when data engineering started, meaning let's say around 10 or 15 years back, and that time there were separate, today also there are separate ETL or ELT tools. But the end layer where you are dumping your data had limited CPU capabilities, because most of them were on premises, and you all know how costly affair it is to upgrade the on-prem. There are multiple downtimes, maintenance. Hence, what organization used to do is, it used to transform the data via the transformation tool itself. And transformation tool had its own CPU. And your database had, meaning the destination where it was supposed to be loaded, had its own CPU. And both of the CPU, since were on premises, they were separately managed so that you can separately manage the performance impact, etc. Hence, ETL was of the utmost process in the earlier days. But eventually, with cloud technologies, cloud booming in, the destination databases started following MPP architecture, that is massively parallel processing framework, like your Fabric Warehouse, or the equivalent of Fabric Warehouse in the Azure world is Synapse Dedicated Pool, or in other cloud technologies, it is Google BigQuery, Snowflake, etc. All these databases are what we call as massively parallel processing. In that, you have a separate compute layer and you have a separate storage layer, and you have multiple what you can say as worker nodes, slave and master and slave node concept, wherein there are multiple worker nodes and a single master who redirects the work across split set. So in that case, since it's a massively parallel processing database, the cost of that database itself is very high, because it is providing you with that much processing capability. So at that time, it does not make sense to the organization to spend a hefty amount of cost on a CPU for transformation tool separately. Because in such aspects, since you already have a processing engine as your end database, you can do your transformations within the database itself because it has a very huge compute layer. So in such cases, there is no need to spend hefty amount of data on your database and on your ETL ELT tool. So at that time, a new process started, wherein rather than the traditional ETL route, that is extract, transform, which used to happen, extract and transform, which used to happen in the integration tool, and load used to get dumped into your destination, a new process started called ELT, a swap between T and L, wherein you extract the data from that tool and load it into your destination, that is within your database, and then do the transformations within the database leveraging the database engine itself, because your database is massively parallel processing CPU. So in that case, this new framework started called ELT, that is extract the data and load it into the destination as is, and then do the transformation on top of that data. So in that case, what is happening is you are still preserving the underlying data. You are still preserving the underlying data in its as is format, meaning if the data is corrupted, you are preserving it as is. And then whatever transformations you want to do, you can do it for a better data analysis. But at any point of the time, in case if you want to identify that what was the source data at that instance, you still have that data within your ecosystem, which was not possible in the ETL process. Now there have been multiple sub branches within this. That is, you have ETLT, ELTL, that is extract, load, transform, and load again, or extract, transform, load, and do transformation again. So there are multiple sub branches, but the main branches are ETL and ELT itself. So Fabric Data Pipeline is an ETL/ELT tool that Microsoft Fabric provides for data movement and data transformation. Any queries? Or to be more specific, let me take one step back. Data Factory experience of Microsoft Fabric is the ETL ELT tool that Microsoft Fabric provides, and within that we have data pipeline, which is a controlled flow of the tasks that you want to execute on your data. Any queries? Now,
Nandan, can we, in short, can we ETL and ELT, can we define as a, like, it's a pipeline approach where data is transformed before loading. This is called ETL, right? And ELT for ELT, the approach where data is transformed after loading. Is it
correct.
correct definition?
Correct. So any other queries, Ramesh?
No, no, fine.
Okay. So now pipeline is basically a controlled flow of certain tasks that we want to do with respect to the data or for the data. Now, when I say tasks, those tasks are what we see as activities here. Activities are basically different tasks that we can do across the data. Now, those tasks, you can see that certain tasks that are visible here, but these are not the only set of tasks that are available. So if you click on this all activities ellipsis, you can see that there are different set of tasks that are present here, which are similar to some of them which are already present here. Now, the tasks are categorized based on the output or what aspect they are there for with respect to the data. So, the first category of activities or tasks are move and transform. Now, within move and transform, we have three activities. You have copy data activity. Now, as the name suggests, it copies the data from one source to another, from one location to another location, meaning from source to a destination or source to a sink. That is what the copy activity is. Then you have the data flow. Now, if you all remember, I stated that Data Factory Experience supports two features, data pipeline and data flow Gen 2. Now, one can trigger a data flow Gen 2 via the data pipeline in a controlled way. That is the data flow. And we'll discuss data flow eventually. Then you have delete data activity in case if you want to delete certain data from certain sources. So this is move and transform category activities. Then you have metadata and validation activity. Lookup meaning you want to check whether there is what data you want to look up into that corresponding source and check the data aspects within that corresponding source. I'm looking up into that source. Then you have get metadata activity. There's certain, I won't be covering all the activities in the practical demo. We would be covering some of the major activities. So now in the get metadata activity, as the name suggests, imagine that you have a file uploaded in the Azure Blob Storage. I want to get the file name. I want to get the size of that file and when was this file last modified. Now these are the metadata of that file that are being preserved in the Azure Blob Storage, the file name, the file size or file extension or when it was last modified. So I can get those metadata from this get metadata activity. And this is not specific for Azure Blob Storage. There are other sources as well that does support get metadata. And we will take a look as to how to identify what sources and sinks are supported across different activities. Then you have control flow. See, these are the different tasks, but you want to control the task in a particular way, correct? Imagine that I want to run this set of tasks if this happens, else go this route. So I want to control it in certain manner. So for that you have control flow activities. You have if activity. You have switch activity. If activity is if it is a true or false scenario. But imagine that if you have multiple cases that if value is this, run this. If value is this, run this. If value is this, run this. Then you have switch activity. Then there are filter activity. If you want to filter out certain data, then you want to wait for some time in a controlled way. You have wait activity. Then for each. For each is your for each loop. Until activity is equivalent to your until loop. Until you meet that condition, it would execute. Set variable, append variable, I'll discuss in detail eventually in subsequent sessions. Fail activity, as the name suggests, if I want to fail something explicitly with particular, I want to throw an error, it's the fail activity. Then orchestrator. Orchestrator is basically in case if I want to orchestrate some external events. If I want to trigger REST APIs, external events. So for that you have orchestrator category, wherein you can trigger some Azure PaaS offerings like Azure Batch, Azure HD Insight is a cluster, Azure Functions, Azure Databricks, etc. Then notifications. Imagine that in case let's say there's some failure within this pipeline or post the successful execution, you want to send a notification to a certain group or to within a Teams channel. or a Teams chat per se. You can use this notification aspect. And then there's some transformation activities that are present here. And finally, the machine learning. So there are multiple activities or what we call as tasks that are categorized based on what they do within the data pipeline. And we'll cover some of the activities in a practical demo. So any queries on the concept of what a data pipeline is? If no,